Hi everyone, I'm just going to give it a couple of minutes and then we'll start with session 4. Hi everyone, it's a couple minutes in so we'll start. I hope you had a good half term and ready to get back to it. So since you've had a week off, we'll just review what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks. So we started the first week by looking at variables and we've got the name variable holding the string value of Charlie. We've got the age variable holding the integer value of 27. We've got the left to pay variable with the float value of 29.99. And we have the has paid variable with the boolean of false. Then we had our numerical operators. So we have here x equals the integer 3, variable y equals integer 6. Then we can just do print the integers 1 plus 2 and it'll just print out the value of 3. Or we could do print the variables y minus x, which would be 6 minus 3, which would give us a value of 3. Or we can have another variable called area and have that as x times y and then print the area. So if we printed the area, what value would we get here? Yeah, we'd get 18. And lastly, we have squared the variable equals x to the power of 2. So the 2 stars mean it's to the power of 2. Then we had concatenation, which was the ability to add strings together. So you remember that you can only add strings and you can't add integers. So we've got here first name equals Bob, last name equals Jones, and then the variable full name equals first name plus a space plus last name. So if we did print hello plus first name, we're going to get hello Bob because Bob is the first name variable. What would we get if we did print good morning plus full name? Yeah, you'd get good morning Bob Jones. So then, because you can't concatenate strings and integers, we use casting to change values into other data types. So our first one, variable x equals int 8.3. Putting int on the outside will change it to an integer, so it will just drop everything from the decimal point. So you can see x will be 8. Y equals float 9. So we've put an integer there, but we're casting it to a float, so it'll change it to 9.0. And lastly, z equals str 10.0, and that will change 10.0 to being a string. So if you want to add and concatenate strings together, you have to change integers or floats to strings first. Then we had input. So we first name equals input, what's your name? And remember, input is always a string. So any value you give it is going to be a string unless you tell it otherwise. So we've got print hello plus name, and that will be whatever you have input. But then because we are getting an age and we want to do some maths with it, we want to add 10 to it, we have to change it to an integer when we receive the input in order to do the maths. So as you can see, we've got the age variable equals int input. How old are you? And then that will change it into an integer. So in the second variable, age in 10 years, we get to do age plus 10. But if that was a string, it wouldn't work. So that is why we have to change it to an integer first. And then, because we're going to add that integer to a string again in the last sentence, print in 10 years you will be, we are changing it and casting it again to a string. And that's why it has the plus str, age in 10 years. And then we started looking at our conditional statements. So we had if first, so age equals int input, how old are you? And we've again used an int here because we're going to do some maths with it. So we're going to say if the age is greater or equal to 18, print you can vote. So if I input my age as 16, would it print you can vote, yes or no? You're right. Because I'm 16, this statement, print you can vote, will only happen if the age is over 18. So you're right, it would not print. Then we wanted to check more than one statement, so we added our else. So now, if I put that I was 16 into this statement, what would be printed? Now that we have an else statement to check another condition. Correct. So because if age is greater than or equal to 18, it will print you can vote else, so any other, which would mean it's less than 18, it'll print try voting next time. Then we had our if, else, elif. So we had our elif, and this is where if we want to check multiple different conditions, we have elifs in between our ifs and elses. So we have name equals Bob, and then we have a few conditions that we're checking. So if the name equals Alice, we'll print hello Alice. Elif, so next condition, name equals Bob, then we're going to print hello Bob. Else we'd print you must be Charlie. So what would happen here? What would be printed? Yep, so we'd get hello Bob. What if I put the name as Sophia? What would get printed? Yeah, you're all right. So because it doesn't fit either of the first two statements, the else would catch it and it would be you must be Charlie. So when you're doing your if statements, order does matter. So we've got age here, int input how old are you? So we're going to get again an integer so we can do some math with it. So if the age is less than or equal to 13, it's going to print you are 13 or younger. And if the age is less than 18, it'll print you are between 14 and 17. And if the age equals 0, it'll print you aren't born yet. Else, it'll print you are 19 or over. But because so if I input the age of 0, because age is less than or equal to 13, it will print you are 13 or younger. It won't get to the 0, it'll stop there. So if you want that to run, you'd have to put it at the top like we have here. So if you run it, the code runs downwards, so as long as you've put the conditions in the correct order, which you'll need for this week's questions, this is an important thing to consider. Just remember to get things in the right order if that's how you want it to be seen or executed. Then we had our and or nots. So we've got if age is greater than 12 and age is less than 20, it's going to print you are a teenager, but both of these conditions need to be true before the you are a teenager will be printed. So if only the age was greater than 12, but the age was not less than 20, then it wouldn't print it. So for this to happen, you need both conditions to be satisfied. However, with an OR statement, you only need one condition to be satisfied. So if age is less than 13 or age is greater than 19, if your age is either one of those things, it will print you are not a teenager. And lastly, we have the if not. So that will say if not age is greater than 12 and age is less than 20, it will print you are a teenager. You are not a teenager. Okay, so that is the catch up of all the things we've done in the last couple of weeks. So does anyone have any questions? I'll just give you a minute. I'll check the Slido if you have any questions. So one of the questions that's come up is how do I hashtag everything all at once on my MacBook? So the way you do that, I'll just switch over to my REPL quickly and show you. So I'll just write a little statement, name equals input what is your name? Then we'll just print the name out. So that's our little bit of code. If you want to comment this out, you highlight it all, and if you're on a MacBook, you do Command/, and if you're on a Windows, you do a Control/, and that's how you do that. Okay, so I can't see any questions. I think Jake's picking up anything that are questions from before. Okay, so we'll start with this lesson, and in this lesson we are going to be covering firstly lists and then for loops. So a list is just a collection of data. So let's see that in practice. So we have here a list of names. A list you create by stating the name of your list. So here we have names and then equals and then square brackets. So square brackets are really important because that's how you create a list. And then in between you're going to put the names or the different strings that you want, and they are separated by a comma. And then, as we've seen previously, you can print out the names, each one, by using the index. So if we remember, index 0 is the first in Python. So if we do print the name of the list, which is names, and then square brackets and the index 0, we're going to get Alice. If we do print, again, the name of the list, which is names, square bracket index 1, we'll get Bob, and then the same again for 2, and we'll get Charlie. So I'll just show you how you do that yourselves. So creating a list is as simple as creating the name. So that's names. That's now the name of my list. And then I have my square brackets and I'll put in the names and I'll separate them by a comma. And then I can just print the name of my list by just putting print and then names, and you'll see it's printed them all out. But if I wanted to print just Alice, I do print names and then the index, which would be 0 for Alice, and there you see it just prints out Alice. So always remember, if you're creating a list, it has to have these square brackets. If it doesn't have square brackets, it's not a list in Python. So you can do different things to your list. So we've just created a list and seen what's within it. But that now you can append. So say you want to add the name Dave. You do the name of your list, so in this case it's names, dot append, and then your normal brackets, you put in the new value. And then if you print them all, you can see that Dave has been added. So we'll try that out here. So if I do names, because that's the name of my list. So if I change this to people, I'd have to change everything to people. So people.append, and then in my brackets, I'm going to put in the new person. And then if I print it out again, we should see how it is changing. So you can see the list originally has just Alice, Bob and Charlie. We've printed Alice out and now we've appended Dave, and that means we've added him to our list. So dot append is just adding. So append is to add. So if you see dot append, it means it's adding to something. And in this case, because we are putting the name of our list in the front, so names dot append Dave, and then you can see it's added Dave to the end here. But you can also change it. So say you've created a list and Charlie was originally there, but Charlie's now left, and you want to replace Charlie with Chris. What you do is you state the name of your list, you put in the index of the character you want to change, and then you put the new value in. So let's try that. So I've got to state the name of my list, which is people. I'm going to change Chris. I'm changing Charlie to Chris, so Charlie is the second index. And then I just state with an equal sign what I want the new value to be. And the way I can check that is work is if I print out my list afterwards. And you can see here that Charlie is no longer and Chris has taken over. You can also delete from your list. So if you just want to get rid of someone completely, you just state del names and then the index of the person or the item you want to get rid of. So you do del, the name of your list, and then the index. So let's try that. So we'll do del, the name of the list, and we're going to get rid of Bob. So he's at index 1. And then again, I'll check this by printing out my list. And you can see now that Bob has been deleted. You can also use an if statement to go and have a look and see what's in your list. So we have our list of names here, which is Alice, Bob and Charlie, and we're going to check to see if Eve is in the list. So to do that, we do if and then state the string you want to check, and then in, and then whatever your list name is. So we have if string Eve is in names, the list, print Eve is here, else print Eve isn't here. So if I run that now, what would be printed? Correct. Because Eve isn't here, she's not in the list, it wouldn't be printed. That was correct. That would be printed that she isn't here. Then we can check the length of a list. So we're using len that we've done previously, and we're just using it around the list of items. So we can just move over to REPL, and we can do print, and then you're using len, and then in the brackets you're now just inputting the name of your list. And we've seen above that there's 3, and it's told us there's 3, which is correct. And lastly, you can sort your list. So if you want to sort your list alphabetically, you can use the dot sort function, and you would state it as the name of your list. So we have names dot sort, and then you need those 2 brackets at the end. They're important because it's a function, which we'll be going into at a later stage. And then you just print your names to see that it's worked. So ours are already in alphabetical order, but I'll just move Alice. I'll just add a couple of A's at the beginning, and if we run it now, we'll have a look, see what it looks like. Okay, so these aren't in alphabetical order. So if we now do people.sort and then print that list, so we do print people, you can see now at the bottom we have them in a nice alphabetical order. Okay, so coding time section A, I'll give you all five minutes to start with these, and let me know if you have any questions. So if you go on to Twitch and and then you scroll down, you'll see all the questions from week 4 here. And I just saw that I put the key up, but don't worry, I've already reset it, so there will be no one joining on. Okay, so I'll leave these questions up. Section A here, just give you a second to go through them and ask me any questions, and Jake's in the chat as well. So how is everyone finding the question? Okay, so you've had a few minutes on those questions. If you have any questions about them, let me know and I'll check the chat. I've checked Slido um, and there's a couple of where are the questions for the week? I can't see the questions, so if that happens, you can see them on the screen now, but also give it a refresh because they're in this section. But for now, let's carry on. So someone's just asked how do you delete stuff from the list. So if you just refer to this, it's del brackets name, so the name of your list, and then the index of whatever you want to delete. To change something in the list, that's back here. So you do the name of your list and then the index of what you want to change, and then you put equals and your new value. Okay, so let's move on to for loop. What is the syntax for appending? I'll just show you that again. So appending here is the name of your list, dot append, and then in the brackets, the new value. So if you just make sure that whatever you're calling your list, you're using in the dot append, and then you have the brackets as well around the value of the new item. Okay, so a for loop allows you to iterate through your list and print out each item. And the way it works is you use for, so for, and then person is going to be your new variable. So you're going to create that while you create the for loop. So it can be anything you want, but it makes sense because the person is going to be each one of these in the list. So it'll be Alice, then Bob, then Charlie. It's helpful to name it something that you'll understand. So because it's going to be each person in names, we've done for person in, and then you state your list for person in names, print person. So that will then print them out each individually. So it'll go through your list, it'll find the first one and then print it out, and then it'll loop through again and find Bob and do the same thing and loop through again and find Charlie. And then when there's nothing else, it'll just break and stop the loop. So if we go back to the code we've already written, and we'll do for person, because that's the new variable I'm creating, in people, print person. We'll just run that, and you can see at the bottom it's printed them all out one after another. So I'm just going to highlight all of this and do Command/ if you're on a MacBook, or a Control/ if you're on Windows, and run it again, and there you can see it printed out. So this variable is be whatever you call it. So you can call it I, you can call it X. I call it something that helps me understand what I'm going to do. So I'm going to print out each person in my people list, so therefore I called it person. So here is your syntax. So you do for the name of your item in items, so that it could be your list, and then your code. So I've asked to print out the item, but you can do other things. Whatever code you want executed for as many item in items you can do. So we have a range here. So if you just want your loop, rather than having to go through a list of specific things, if you want it just to run for as many times as you ask it to, you can use range. So we have here for my number in range 5, print my number. And as you can see, it's only gone to 4 because Python starts at 0. So if you're using the range and you're putting a number, if you want 5, you're going to actually have to put 6 in because Python starts at 0. So these are ranges. So we've got here the first one. If you just put range 10, it's going to print out the first 9 numbers. If you do range 1 to 5, the first one is where the number it will start at, but the last one is where the number it will finish on from the index. Because the index starts at 0, it will finish at 4, but because you've stated 1, it'll start with 1. And the last one is called a step function. So you give it the first value, you give it the second value where you want it to end, and then you put how much it's going to increase by each time. So in this case it will be 4. So what we'll do is we'll just try those out. So we have for number in range, and then I'll put 5 again. I'm going to print the number. You always have to put a semicolon on the end, otherwise it won't work. So if I'd forgotten to do that, you'll just get an error like this saying invalid syntax, and it's helpfully pointing you to exactly where it wants you to change it. So we do for number in range, and you can see it's done 0 to 4. If I change it to 10, it will do 0 to 9. If I started it, I could start it at 2 and run it to 10. That means it will start at the number I've asked, but then it will only still go to 9 because it is starting at 0. And lastly, we can do it from 1000, put another number 3000, and we'll jump by 10 each time. And you can see here, it started from 1,000 and it's going up by 10 each time. So that's a little look at ranges. So it's now coding time B. So what I'm going to do is if you can start doing some questions and I'm going to go through some code examples of for loops just so it's easy for you to understand them. And if you have any questions in the chat, let me know and we'll be able to help you with the questions. So So here are your section B questions. So I'll go over doing a for loop. So I'm going to create a new list firstly, and my list is going to be called animals. And then you remember with a list you need your square brackets, and then I will put some animals in here. So I've got a frog, a dog, a cat, a mouse, and a rabbit. So that's just me creating a list. And then I can add to my list by doing animals.append, and then I'm going to add a giraffe. And it'll always, and then anytime I do something, I just print it out to see what is happening. So I've got print animals, and you can see it always adds it straight to the end. But now my cat has run away, so I'm going to change cat. So because it's the second index, I just state the name of my list, the one I want to change, and now I'm going to have that as a lemur. Again, I'm going to print my list, and it's changed. That's fine. Now I'm going to delete from my list the frog. So I do del, the name of my list, and then the index. So I'm going to print and it's got rid of it. And now I can sort them alphabetically. So I do the name of my list, dot sort, and don't forget these brackets on the end. And then I'll print my list. And now it's been sorted alphabetically. Now I want to print out each animal in my list. So I will do for, which starts it off. Then I'm going to call my variable animal because I'm going to print each animal in my list of animals. And then, so for each animal in the list, I want it to be printed out. And there you go. It looked like REPL was just being a bit slow there. So that's printed them out for me. I could do the if statement. So I could say if giraffe is in, and then the name of my list. I can print So I've just created that little bit of code. So what is going to happen if I run that? So if I run it, let's see what happens. So because giraffe is in my list, it will print out there is a giraffe. If I wanted to see how many animals I have, I could do print len animals, and it will print out the length of my list. If you have so one of the questions on Slido is, what does index out of range mean? If the index is out of range, that means you're trying to, if I change this to 7, it's going to tell me it's out of range because there is no index 7 available here. So it's index 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you're trying to change something that is too big, it's going to say it's indexed out of range. So you just need to make sure that you're using an index that is within your list. So someone's asked how we do question 2b. So let's have a look. So print the numbers 1 to 100. So instead of showing you how to print the numbers 1 to 100, I can show you how to print some numbers, and then you can work out how to get to 100. So if I want to print, so if I do for numbers in and then range, then you put the amount. So I want to print to 10, but because Python starts at 0, I'm going to have to start at 11, and then I will do print number. And you can see it gives me 0 to 10 because I've put 11 here. If I'd put 10, because I want to print out 10 numbers, it's only going to give me 9 because Python starts at 0, as we know. And then to work out if something is an odd or an even number, if you think you could use the step function because every other number is odd or every other number is even. So that's a hint for that question. So if I did print the range and then 2, I've then got all the odd numbers. But then you can do it a different way. You can, if you remember using your modulus, and you could say if number modulus 2 equals 0, print number. And that's how you can get some even numbers. So they're just a couple of different ways. And again, this just shows you that Python is, there's lots and lots and lots of different ways to get to the right answer. As long as you're getting to the right answer, that's the main thing. So that's going through how you can get odds and evens. So someone's asked, is it good? And then has given me some code. So I'm going to copy that code over and print it. And that looks good to me. So that code looks all good. Okay, so is there any more questions? So if people are saying things aren't working, you need to give me your error message. So let's try this one. We'll copy your code over. So for number in range 1 to 100, if number divided by 2 equals 1. So what you're missing is a colon here. And then you need to make sure that's tabbed inwards. And there you go. So it's just syntax. You just need to make sure that you always, for if statement, it always needs a colon. For a for statement, it always needs a colon. So someone asking, how do you have more than one input? You just have name equals input. So you can use a for loop to get multiple inputs. So let me just see if I can find a good example of this. So someone's asked, how do we skip the years in the Olympic question? So I'll just put on the screen the example that you'll need. So this last one is the range you'll need, but you'll have to input the ones for the Olympics. So you have to change it slightly, but that is the information you'll need for that. And the bonus points, think of a way that you can skip them. If you can't work it out, don't worry, we're going through all this on Thursday. So someone said, I don't know how to do the odd question. I know how to do even, but not odd. So if you think about the maths of it, if you have a number and you divide it by 2 and the remainder is 0, you know that is even. But if you do the remainder is 1, so if you think of any number, if you divide it by 2 and the remainder is 1, that is how you know if it's odd. How to do alphabetically the list. So I'll see if I still have a list up in my REPL. So if you look here, this is where I sort out the list. So this is how you do something alphabetically. So if I run that, just get rid of the code. Sometimes if it's saving up here, it struggles a little bit. So we'll just refresh that. And if I run that, you'll see here it was not alphabetical, and here it's alphabetical because of this. So you put the name of your list, dot sort. You have to remember these brackets on the end. These brackets are very important. So someone's asked, how do you make random numbers? Random numbers we'll be looking at next week, but if you want to look now, you can check out modules and the random module. So someone's put fruits.sort, print fruits. That's not putting our fruit in order. Can you help, please? I'll need to see more of your code because that looks fine to me. So if you've seen here, I've done animals.sort. Animals here, I've made sure, and if you highlight something in REPL, it's good because it'll show you where it's highlighting it and where it's the exact same. So if you're highlighting your fruits.sort and it doesn't highlight here, that could be an issue. You may have missed these double brackets. To refresh your page in REPL, you just press the refresh button in the top corner. So simple chain, you've not used the correct brackets. So these brackets here, oh sorry. So I need to see the whole list of fruits. So say I'm just gonna put onto your fruits list apple, and then you're going to append this. Let's see what happens. So it's worked for me. So if you have a see, make sure that your list is called fruits, because that could happen if your list is called something different. So if you've called something different to here, it can't append it. It needs to know where it's appending it to. So you could even have an empty list. So you could just have it like that. And if I run it, it'll fill the empty list. So another thing you can do, so you can, someone's asked, how can you use an input command to enter names into a list? Okay, so what we can do here is the first thing you're going to do if you're going to add stuff to a list is you need an empty list to put things in. So if you start with, and then I'm going to use a for loop. So for name in, and how many names do I want to add to my list? I'm going to add 5 this time. I'm going to create a variable called name equals input. What is your name? And then every time a name is input, I'm going to use the append. So what I'm doing here is, this is an empty list. This name here is whatever's input here, and every time that's input is going to be appended. And then once we've finished with the loop, outside of the loop, I'm going to print the list names. So we've got input 5 names, and there you have, we've got the input in our for loop, we've asked for it 5 times and it's appended it to this list. So that's one way of doing it. So number 5, it says create a list of 10 random numbers. So all we're asking you to do there is just create a list of 10 random numbers. So I'd call it random underscore numbers, and then I would just myself put in 10 random numbers. So that's, and just so on. And then you're going to loop through that list and count the number of even numbers and count the number of odd numbers. So to do something, just to count the numbers, like you need an empty list, you need something where you're going to store. So if you do count equals 0, for I in random numbers, count, so the count here equals count plus 1. And then I'm going to print out count, and we can see if that works. So that's an example that should help you with question 5. So basically what that's doing is I have a count here outside that I'm starting at 0. And then for I, so that could be, I can change that for number, but what it's doing is for every time it sees something in this list, it's just going to add 1 to it. So because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers, it's counted 6 times and added it to here, and then I've printed it out at the end because it'll loop each time through this, and it'll only break when there's no more numbers or eyes for it to read. So that's the start of number 5, but instead you might have to loop through and you might have to have some if statements where you're going to have to work out if it's even or if it's odd. Python can generate random numbers, and that's what we look at next week in modules. So Python modules are where we will use random next week. Okay, so there's no more questions in the Slido. And let's have a look. So you've got some for loop questions, you've got some loops and appends. So for any like that, you can just refer to this one. So I've put it so you can input a name, but you could just have had hard-coded names in here and get rid of this line. But then you'd have to just make sure that you're using the list. And if you've got your names there, then you might need your names to list, which is an empty string, which is where you're going to append some names. And as you can see, all that's doing is taking these names and putting them straight into there, but you could change it. You could do name plus hi. And there it's adding things on. So these are just different ways you can take your original list, you can have another list that you're going to put your new things in, and then inside your for loop is where you'll do your code for your secondary list. Okay, so if there's no more questions in Slido, which there's not, and there's no more questions in the chat, then I shall see you all on Thursday to go through the rest of the questions. Remember, you can ask the Slido questions every day. Ask if you have any errors, just make sure you put in the full error and your code so we can help you with that. But we'll be checking it every night to make sure that we can help you. But if not, have a good rest of the week, and I shall see you on Thursday. Bye. Remember that these lessons are posted on the site afterwards, so you can watch them and re-watch them as many times as you want to understand the concepts and go through the code. And you can go through the same code examples I did to help your understanding. So someone's just put a question onto with some code, so I'll try it out for you and see if we can help. So we've got to make sure we've got all these. So that looks like it's fine to me, so it might just be your indenting, so make sure that your last print is outside, because if I put it inside the loop, it's just going to print every time it adds one on, whereas if you just want the total amount, that's how you'll get the total amount. So that code looks to be working fine. You're just going to need to amend it for the question, because the question wants you to see how many odd and even numbers are. So if you think about, that's just counting all of them, but in your for loop you want to see how many evens and how many odds there are. Okay, so there's no more questions. Again, put them in and I'll answer them. If not, I'll see you on Thursday with the answers. Bye.